90. 90.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to representatives from state governments, various state departments, planning departments for today's state webinar. Today, we have gathered here to understand the importance of administrative data and survey data in monitoring and evaluation to strengthen the data ecosystem of the government. Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, NITI Aayog, has developed a data governance quality index, Dgqi as we call it as an abbreviation, and we will be disseminating the learnings of this exercise with the audience. Learnings and experience to take this forward. Before we begin with the presentation, I would like to remind the audience of some housekeeping rules. All participants will be on mute. Please use the question and answer box to type questions, and we will take them up towards the end of the presentation. We do look forward to a lot of questions because that is what will make this session come alive. So do ask many questions so that we can have a discussion towards the Dgqi started. Thereafter, we will talk about what is Dgqi and where we will explain the scope, approach, and methodology of Dgqi in detail. We will then also talk about how can states use Dgqi after necessary customization, because the purpose ministries and departments have already adopted this and have come some distance. It is very important that the same consciousness, awareness is created all through the country and into the states as well. After the presentation, as earlier promised, we will take questions from the audience. I think one should totally acknowledge the role as guide, mentor, and architect that Dr. Bonu has played in this exercise.
Warm welcome to everyone to this webinar on insights from the Data Governance Quality Index exercise for states and union territories. As you all know, a Development Monitoring Evaluation Office and evaluation in this country, and close to 15 lakh crore rupees is spent on central sector and centrally sponsored schemes, and the administrative data that comes from these schemes implementation is at the core of the effectiveness of these schemes implementation and its effectiveness in delivering the outcomes. And also the same data is also extremely critical for evidence-based policy making and yet because of gaps in the administrative data quality, we haven't fully tapped the potential of the big data revolution as we see it all across. The Data Governance Quality Index, if you want the data maturity level of administrative data systems of the ministries and departments, and use this measurement to trigger structural reforms to improve the quality of data, to do higher level analysis, and to obtain office. NITI Aayog and DMO have been rolling out the Data Governance Quality Index since 2020. And we have 2 years of implementation experience across 73 line ministries. And in the recent exercise, we have looked at close to 600 and close to 700 odd schemes and non-schemes, and have a rich experience of in the government of India, and its impact on evolving action plans for improving data governance, and also setting up to pave the path to that for Government of India to achieve that higher level of data revolution that we are seeing across. So today, the whole objective of this webinar is to present the data governance and my team has also prepared a data governance quality methodological toolkit, especially for the state government counterparts and officials, so as to disseminate the learnings from the data governance quality index that we have done over the last 2 years. And also along with handholding support that DMO and my colleagues are willing to extend, we are hoping that the state governments and union territories will customize the data governance quality index and undertake self-assessments of data preparedness levels in their own departments. These toolkits which have been prepared, there are some customized user cases, especially this webinar and discussions later on. The key decision makers in the states, chief secretaries, principal secretaries of quality index to transform their administrative data systems and seamlessly transition into open data ecosystems, about which my colleagues will speak a lot more. With this, before I conclude, I urge all the states and union territories to have a deep look at this toolkit and use it to drive data revolution across this nation and pave way for data-based, evidence-based policy making and program implementation across. With this, short video which summarizes the whole exercise and also has some very important statements. This, I request my team to start with the video, and then later on we'll have a presentation followed by discussion. Thank you all.
भारत के माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी के द्वारा मिनिमम गवर्नमेंट मैक्सिमम गवर्नेंस के मूल मंत्र को साकार करने में डेटा की एक
डेटा ही इंफॉर्मेशन है और आने वाले समय में हमारी हिस्ट्री भी डेटा के जरिए देखी और समझी जाएगी. In future, data will be dictating the history.
भारत सरकार के इतिहास में सबसे से भारत सरकार के मंत्रालयों ने अपने सभी स्कीम को डिजिटल करने और हाईटेक इंफॉर्मेशन सिस्टम बनाने के लिए कई कदम उठाए हैं. इन प्रयासों को और बल एवं बेहतर दिशा देने के लिए 2000 Dgqi का निर्माण किया. इस इंडेक्स के द्वारा सभी मंत्रालय अपनी योजनाओं का डेटा किस प्रकार जनरेट कर रहे हैं, किस प्रकार उसकी क्वालिटी मेंटेन कर रहे हैं और अंत में किस प्रकार वो इस डेटा को अपनी नीति व योजनाओं को सशक्त बनाने के लिए प्रयोग कर रहे हैं. को इस विशाल स्केल पर इंप्लीमेंट करने वाला भारत पूरे विश्व में पहला देश बन गया है. Dgqi वीक एरिया को पहचान सके और उसको सही करने के लिए एक क्लियर एक्शन प्लान बना सके. इस प्रकार एक दूसरे की गुड प्रैक्टिसेस से सीखते हुए सभी मंत्रालय भारत सरकार के एविडेंस बेस्ड पॉलिसी मेकिंग के लक्ष्य पर आगे बढ़ सकेंगे. डेटा गवर्नेंस के इस लक्ष्य की प्राप्ति हेतु इस इंडेक्स के अंतर्गत गवर्नमेंट के कई पैमानों का ध्यान रखते हुए डैशबोर्ड के माध्यम से सभी मंत्रालय इस सेल्फ असेसमेंट सर्वे को हर क्वार्टर ऑनलाइन भर पाएंगे। इसके बाद ये डैशबोर्ड हर एक केंद्रीय मंत्रालय के सभी योजनाओं और अन्य आईटी इनिशिएटिव्स के डेटा सिस्टम एवं उनके एक्शन प्लान को ऑटोमेटिकली 0 से 5 के बीच में एक से इम्प्रूव करते जाएंगे और डेटा ड्रिवन डिसीजन मेकिंग की ओर बढ़ते जाएंगे। वैसे वैसे उनका DGQI स्कोर भी 5 की तरफ बढ़ता जाएगा। लर्निंग, जियो टैगिंग जैसी टेक्नोलॉजी को प्रमोट करके भारत को इस भविष्य के लिए तैयार कर रहा है।
साथियों, अब एक नए तरह के फ्यूल की जरूरत पड़ने वाली है। अगले 2 दशक में बिग डेटा, मशीन लर्निंग, ब्लॉकचेन, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस जैसी कई नई तकनीक का दौर आने वाला है। ये सारी तकनीक डेटा पर आधारित होगी और इसलिए अब कहा जाना लगा है कि दुनिया में
पर 35 लाख से ज्यादा डेटा पॉइंट इकट्ठा कर चुका है। इस मिशन को आगे बढ़ाते हुए भारत सरकार के सभी मंत्रालयों को दिसंबर 2022 तक DGQI के अंतर्गत सभी मंत्रालयों को DGQI 5 आउट ऑफ 5 स्कोर तक पहुंचने के लिए अपने एक्शन प्लान में 5 एरियाज पर विशेष ध्यान देना होगा। अपनी सारी योजनाओं और अन्य आईटी इनिशिएटिव्स को डिजिटाइज करना, सभी डेटा क्वालिटी प्रोटोकॉल्स का सख्ती से पालन करना, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस का ध्यान रखते हुए एक सिनर्जिस्टिक और ओपन डेटा सिस्टम को डेवलप करना। इस तरह DGQI डिजिटल एविडेंस बेस्ड पॉलिसी मेकिंग को भारत सरकार के DNA में शामिल करने में एक महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभाएगा।
why this entire exercise was contextualized a little bit in detail, and then subsequently we will try and look into the mechanics of how this entire exercise was implemented, its methodology, scope and approach, and we will now look at next. Yeah.
Deepak, you need to give me presenting rights.
Yeah. So, as we already seen in the video, the importance of this entire exercise of data governance quality index cannot be any further emphasized, in the sense that it has received attention from the highest levels. Very recently, Honorable Prime Minister in his address to Labasna also mentioned that data governance should now become one of the key themes of structuring and designing training programs and embedding them across the entire government. So that tells us about the importance this entire exercise has in the larger context. Next slide. So before we get into the specifics of DGQI, we would want to take a step back and talk about what do we mean when we say administrative data, because this exercise is largely about transforming the administrative data ecosystem, and therefore administrative data would include any data that is collected in the process of Now that can include programmatic data for our schemes, the MIS systems that we have, the data which is collected as a part of services delivery in form of various public services, metro, UPI, etc. So a lot of compliance data which is generated, tax returns, and also the data which is collected in the process of broader public administration form of crime stats and etc. and other elements. So those are the kind of data sets which we typically call administrative data, and it is different from the survey based data sets because survey data is typically used and focused for collecting beneficiary level administrative data tends to be much more frequent, regular, and most importantly, as compared to survey data, it is universal in coverage as against typically the sampling based surveys that we see for that kind of data sets. So with that understanding, it is important to understand how administrative and data survey data sets play a critical role in the life cycle of the schemes. Next slide, please. So if we look at the scheme life cycle, and this is something which we are all aware about, that we design a scheme, implement it, and during the implementation stage concurrently also monitor it, because then we would want to make certain changes to its implementation mechanisms or funding patterns, and then that is eventually used for and then eventually we get into the stage of evaluations, which are typically post facto analysis of the impact of the programs, and then that analysis feeds back into the review and again redesign of the scheme. That's the life cycle which we see, and generally you will see that for the scheme implementation stage, post design, and that is basically the monitoring part, administrative data is used, and generally for the evaluation stage, survey data is used, and then you kind of triangulate the findings we see from the surveys in evaluations, and therefore this is the change we need to make. Now, in that entire life cycle, what is happening is because of the technological changes, we are finding that administrative data and survey data are now increasingly being used in conjunction with each other, and that unlocks a lot of value. I'll try and exemplify that using certain examples. So for example, if there is a scheme which is providing subsidy for crop residue management to reduce, let's say, burning, crop burning in certain state, eventually you will find that if the administrative data is mainly focusing on collection of, let's say, data on whether the subsidy has been transferred to the beneficiaries, in case if rental equipments are available, then whether or not those equipments are being taken up or not. Now, the moment you introduce geotagging in such a data set, or you introduce, let's say, means to collect much more granular data, you can start using that. You can start layer artificial intelligence on top of it and start predicting which micro geographies, which blocks, which cluster of villages are likely to see same process also predict the impact. So you are starting to use, in this example, you are starting to use administrative data and artificial intelligence for predicting the impact. The other way around, because of the IVRS kind of survey capabilities, you can also start measuring to conduct a social audit, and you have an app, and then that starts tracking the implementation on a very high frequency measure as well. So increasingly there is this marriage between survey and administrative data sets, which is unlocking a lot of value for the entire policy making cycle. And let's look at how this has evolved in terms of the GovTech sector that we are talking about. So if you look at the evolution of administrative data sets, initially it all started with individual. So in fact, at the very beginning, somewhere around the mid of 90s and up until mid 2000s, till up until let's say late up until 2017 or 18, there was this entire drive of building MIS systems along with dashboards. And for every scheme we have individual MIS systems and individual end-to-end dashboards. These are monolithic systems, but the problem with such monolithic systems is they don't talk to each other. Our individual technological architectures are different. Often their data schema and standards are also different, and hence they don't talk to each other. Which is why there is a need for the third technological revolution that we are going to see, which will basically enable such seamless exchange, and that is the open data ecosystems that DG also the new kinds of federated data architectures that we are seeing. So that's the evolution, and that's what we want to leverage. But in order to this change, to enable endless use of evidence monitoring, endless use of administrative data for entire life cycle of the scheme, as we saw in the previous slide, there are still certain challenges which we have to deal with. Next slide. These challenges, as I already highlighted some of them, are current data systems are siloed. They have non-standard data schema and data exchange standards. Hence, they don't talk to each other. Also, in a lot of cases, the data which is collected at the ground does not use, and hence that data is not granular or frequent enough to be linked with similar equally granular or frequent data set which may be existing. Often there is no quality at entry, and in general we find that the accessibility and openness of these data sets, even between the departments and between which we can potentially have even without talking of any new data, just by using existing data sets, are not possible. For example, if the planning department in a state wants to use the data which is there in different departments in a seamless manner through a single platform just by querying and without any manual intervention, if for example any state department, any particular department, let's say health department, wants to have similar conjunctive use of data from its different divisions, it still has to, the principal secretary of that department will still have to request or will have to get the data from individual divisions. And for such, in case if the principal secretary wants to understand what is the contribution of that data set to SDGs or sector level performance, third, if finance department wants to use performance data for budgeting, they need a lot of confidence in that data, and that gets limited because data quality at times is an issue. And lastly, we realize that every division which is using the data based on its based on the reliability of the data sets. So all of these applications get limited because of the challenges that we see. Next slide. And the systemic causes which are hindering administrative data use at a very underlying reason, which is the base of all these challenges that you see, is we have limited human resource capabilities to understand data governance and management practices within the government. Second, the policies for data use and data sharing are not very watertight and not very well implemented. And thirdly, we also see that a lot of data which is already there is not being used, even if it is available. And that's where the insights part gets limited. So we really need a structured and a systematic approach to leverage the upcoming GovTech 3.0 revolution. And that is what Dgqi tries to. What we are to where we need to be in terms of open digital ecosystems, and that process management is what we will talk about today. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. So looking at the objectives of this entire exercise, this exercise is, as already described, intended to ensure that the data now to achieve this vision, Dgqi works with the following objectives. It basically says that there has to be a way to measure where we stand in our journey towards reaching the frontier of seamless data exchange. So there has to be a standardized self-assessment tool. Second, once you start measuring, instead of just ranking and competing, how do we use that to drive reforms, to reflect enable better peer learning, better documentation of best practices, and speed up the entire process of every department in the state reaching a better performance level. So that's the goal. And with that goal, next slide, DGQI basically promulgates. Now that mandate can come from the Chief Secretary of the state or from the Chief Minister in the state itself. And with that mandate, every state should then look to effectively have two broad arms. One is what we did in case of the central government. We had a measurement approach. And on the other side, we were building the act approach, which is where we drive the reforms. In the measurement, using a how can you have a single questionnaire which understands such diverse data systems? So to understand where every department stands. So you do that in a self-assessment mode. You ask the ministries to fill up the questionnaire, and then that gets used for self-assessment to identify where one stands. Now, having done this assessment, it helps the ministries, departments identify areas of reforms, which they then articulate in the ministry or a department in case of a state. Now, for implementing that particular action plan, DGQI proposes that there should be an institution of data and strategy unit, which should be set up in each and every department. Now, this is effectively to drive the entire process, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail in the next slide. And in that process of implementing the action plans through this institution of DSU, capacities have three key levers that can be used at the ministries or in case of state governments, the departments. First is the fact that there has to be an action plan. Now that action plan has to be exhaustive. There has to be a template by whichever is the commissioning agency, be it the planning department in the state government. Plan. In our case, we also had a template. If you can just click on the action plan link. So we, in our case, we had a template like this, which basically asked, requested the departments and the ministries to prepare a standard template of where they stand, what is their vision and mission, and what is the strategy to achieve the Frontier DGQI score. And that has to be prepared for every scheme as well as every intervention. Go back. Now, once this action plan is prepared, which is there, which is to be set up in each and every ministry, which basically brings together all the capabilities pertaining to data and its use in the ministry, and drives that data and puts that unit right under the leadership or right under the reporting of the highest authority in the ministry. Unit to effectively break the data silos in by technological implementation. So if you can just click on the link, it basically has 4 subunits, a monitoring unit and which has to identify what is to be monitored, a statistical unit which collates all the statistics which may be outside of it, individual administrative data sets, technological unit under the leadership of the unit head, which can under the departmental head, and drive the process of breaking of the silos. Go back. And the third process is capacity development, and this is very important. by using these three levers, any department can then reach the frontier score of DGQI by kind of setting the following intermittent milestones. So first, the individual systems which are not yet digitized have to be digitized. Second, it has to be done that while this digitization process is implemented, data quality is standardized and ensured, so that it doesn't happen that we have it has to be used for policy making in a synergistic way, and there has to be processes, institutional processes which have to be set up in to ensure that. And lastly, once these things are once the synergistic data use is already happening, the basics of open data, data security, and data privacy norms have also to be adhered to in the process. So with these milestones, any department can then be given the target of reaching the frontier 5 out of 5 score. Next, I'll request Gunjan to take.
Next slide. So now, having understood the context and the architecture of the overall exercise, we'll now in this section cover how did DMEO implement this exercise for the central ministries, departments of the government of India, and similarly, how can the state governments conduct scope of the exercise. We covered all the 74 ministries, departments of the government of India, and as a part of this Dgqi, the data maturity was assessed for over 630 plus central sector and centrally sponsored schemes, as well as certain non-schematic interventions of the ministries. Non-schematic interventions are digital systems for their implementation and monitoring. So these can be any sector level dashboard that may be required by the department. For example, a steel dashboard to track the production and the supply chain of steel. So these were the kind of interventions that were covered. With this scope, approximately 80% of over 35 lakh data points on the data systems of these ministries and these schemes to measure their data maturity levels. Next slide, please. So within these for all of these ministries and schemes, what were the kind of parameters, what was the vertical scope of the exercise, what were the kind of parameters that we used to measure the data maturity is what is explained in this slide. So as we explained, we undertook this exercise in a self-assessment mode, so the 25 questions which were spread across 12 themes broadly covered under these three pillars. So the three pillars are essentially the three steps that we identified are the steps to better data preparedness levels in governance. So first of all is data strategy. So first of all any department which is aiming to improve its data maturity level needs to have a detailed between these systems. So as we discussed, as a part of the exercise, we recommended the ministries to set up a data and strategy unit and prepare an action plan for this purpose. So as under this pillar, therefore these two themes were covered, where we essentially assessed whether the ministries have set up these DSUs or not, whether these are functional or not, and also whether the action plans have been prepared, and if they have been prepared, are also getting implemented in a timely manner. The next step after a data strategy is laid down is to start implementing the strategy, with the outputs of which will get reflected in the form of robust data systems. So this is the second pillar, which was data systems, where we have 6 themes covering everything in the entire life cycle of data. So we covered everything right from how granularity and frequency at which it is being generated. Then next we covered what are the kind of data quality protocols that are being followed by the departments to ensure the quality of incoming data. Then finally, after generating and after quality control, how is the department analyzing this data and using it for various decision making purposes or policy making purposes on a day-to-day basis. And we also looked at various enablers, where we looked at if the department time basis so that we can be assured of quality data at entry. We looked at ensuring data security and privacy norms are followed as per the prevalent government policies, the HR capacity that is there at the departments to be able to undertake these massive tasks, and also what are the kind of data management processes that are being undertaken to ensure pillar. Also, all these 6 themes were covered for every scheme separately. So for example, if a department has 6 schemes, then for each of those 6 schemes all these data systems were assessed. Then finally, moving from the second pillar to the third pillar. So basically, after the data strategy has been laid down and the data systems have been created, they automatically will not lead to data driven outcomes. They ability of the departments to use this data in a synergistic manner to drive decision making. So therefore, to cover this pillar, we had 4 main themes. First was, how are the departments making synergistic use of data which is already available within their divisions and ensuring that there is data exchange happening within those divisions. So that is covered in the first theme, synergistic data use within the department. Then we covered how are these departments engaging with external agencies, which may be private sector agencies or other government agencies, which may be a collaboration with whom is also required inform present decisions, but to be also able to protect themselves from future risks. And finally, we also requested for good practices from various departments, and we also scored them so that this can be used for disseminating good practices among other departments and can be used for peer learning. So this way, the entire questionnaire has been designed across these 3 pillars and covering these 12 across these 3 pillars and covering these 12 themes. And that is used to generate a Dgqi score for each scheme and each department. Methodology and the scope that was used to undertake this exercise. We would like to take some time to also explain the operational approach with which we operationalize this whole exercise and how the departments can, the state departments can also use the same and take care of certain important aspects during this operationalization. So first of all, sector, both in India as well as in international context. And on the basis of that, we devised a self-assessment questionnaire and methodology that was relevant and that was contextualized for Indian ministries, central ministries. So in a similar way, if state governments are using the Dgqi toolkit now onwards to conduct a similar maturity assessment, they will need to contextualize it for their own purposes. Then after the methodology and questionnaire was designed, we took a very collaborative approach and we ensured close partnership with ministries throughout the process. So we transparently shared everything, the methodology, the questionnaire, the scoring mechanism with the ministries. We finalized them by taking their inputs from ministries, and then we this was another important second step that we used for operationalizing, using an online mode to channel the whole survey. And then the dashboard had automatic score generation mechanisms, which was used to generate Dgqi scores for each schemes and each department, as we discussed. Also, while the ministries are filling up regular capacity building sessions, one-to-one sessions, to make sure that they have the entire idea about how to use this survey questionnaire, which is equally important. After this, after every scoring exercise is done, we share the report cards with the ministries and with some qualitative insights and ideas on how they can improve, on the basis of which, as we discussed, via the 3 levers of change, we initiated reforms at these departments. Measurement was done and the reform plans were developed by the ministries. We embedded the reform tracking also in the scoring. So therefore, if the ministries, as we discussed in the previous slide in the vertical scope, whether the ministries have prepared DSUs and action plans and what is the status of implementation, that is being also used for scoring, so that we are not just using the data systems for scoring, but we are also using the activity side for scoring. And then we have regular quarterly updates to the scores and regular review meetings with the ministries, so that the continuous momentum of reforms is maintained. This way we aim that the ministries will be able to reach the DGQI frontier score of 5.0 within the next few years. Next slide. So like we of change have been very important. So therefore, we'll just take a few minutes to explain the 3 levers of change in detail. Like Anand mentioned, the data and strategy unit was proposed to be set up under each ministry department to essentially break the silos that exist among the various divisions of the ministries and ensure that the monitoring MIS are well developed and it is taking care of every of the needs of every kind of stakeholder. So for example, the monitoring and statistics unit, they will essentially come with inputs about what data needs to be monitored for, let's say, if the output outcome framework is being used for monitoring at the central level. So what data needs to be monitored for OOMF, or let's say for SDG monitoring. The statistics unit come up with input digitized end-to-end digitized systems to be able to monitor all this the data on all these indicators in a digitized manner. And finally, the data analytics unit will use this data to undertake data visualization and different types of analysis, so that this data can be used for decision making purposes. So the entire idea here is to put all these functions together so that these people are working in synergies with each other and not in silos with one another. Next slide, please. Departments to come up with an action plan or a data strategy. So we have already looked at this slide, so I'll not go into a lot of detail, but the idea was that at the ministry level, again, to break the silos, at the ministry level there needs to be a single strategy which is defining how the entire ministries or the entire department's data needs to be managed. And within this strategy itself, there can be scheme-wise strategy, and for non-schematic interventions there can be non-schematic intervention-wise strategy. So therefore, this will be detailed and exhaustive enough. It will be prepared for all the interventions, but at the same time, it will also take care of synergies that need to be taken care of at the ministerial level. And as a part of this action plan, we also requested for the ministries to come up with their operational execution plan. So take all of these actions. That was also covered under the same that was also something that the departments need to think of while developing this action plan. And then, like I mentioned, this action the action points entailed in this action plan are regularly tracked via our DGQI dashboard, and they're used in our scoring to keep up the momentum of the reforms. Next slide. Finally, the third which are involved in the implementation of these reforms. So for capacity development, we identified that we need to develop capacities of both the existing people at the departments, which we plan to do using the structure of the data and strategy units, as well as the incoming people, where we plan to undertake this training right at the entry stage with our engagement with the Department of Personnel and Training. So therefore, to ensure that this capacity development is able to meet its intended goals, DMEO as a central training support unit is providing resources. It is providing curriculums that can be used by the Capacity Building Commission in integration with mission. During this entire process, we have paid focus on partnerships with Labasna, ISTM, other training institutes of the Government of India, as well as with industry experts, so that there can be a holistic training of the ministry department officials from all perspectives. Next slide, please. So with this operational approach and the kind of operational levers of change that we deployed to reform the data systems of the departments of the Government of India. And this slide is essentially showing just how the architecture of the Dgqi dashboard has been designed, where on the same dashboard we have the questionnaire as well as a mechanism to track the action points of the departments, and as well as automated scoring, visualization and reports module. So at the same therefore this same common data architecture on one hand allows the ministry to update their strategy action points and Dgqi questionnaire very easily, in a very user-friendly manner, on a very regular basis, in a digitized manner. And at the same time, because of the automation, it can be simultaneously used by DMEO, NITI Aayog and other stakeholders for regular monitoring and review of these scores. So with this, we cover the operational approach and methodology of the Dgqi exercise. I'll now hand it over.
Thank you, Gunjan. So having looked at the broad scope of Dgqi and the method employed to calculate it, we'll now talk about the core value which the Dgqi can deliver to the states, and how different departments or divisions of the state government can contextualize this tool to use it for different purposes. The first example or the use case we talk about is for planning departments or M&E departments across the states and UTs. And oftentimes it is the monitoring and evaluation units are itself, they themselves are housed in the planning department. Agenda or the sustainable development goals. Now for such analysis, which requires triangulation of data sets, that can be so that triangulation of data sets can then be used for making more informed planning decisions. In pursuit of such goals, there have been several attempts which have been made to create cross-sectoral integrated dashboards which allow for monitoring and planning decisions at the highest levels, such as the Prayas dashboard, which has been created by the Office of the Honorable Prime Minister, or the state CM dashboards, which have been developed in states like Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, etc. Now, this is possible through integration of data systems, and that is often difficult because of the siloed data systems which we talked about, and that itself hinders effective use of data for regular monitoring and decision making. So the planning and the M&E departments can customize and use Dgqi to conduct a comparative assessment of data systems of other departments. For this, they need to make necessary questions of the Dgqi may need to be added and maybe also edited to identify if the data systems track sectoral indicators which are of use to the planning departments or to the M&E from other departments. Now, based on these responses, the whole comprehensiveness of the data systems can be measured, and then theme-wise areas for improvement can be identified. This would simultaneously help in peer learning as well as standardization of data systems that can be easily analyzed together. And apart from measurement, quality standards in a focused and timely manner. So the core value that Dgqi can deliver to the planning departments and the M&E departments is to make use of different data sets in a synergistic manner, and that can be done through customization in order to ensure that certain indicators are being tracked, and in case of non-scheme are being tracked at the sectoral level. Next slide, please. The next use case is in effect a parallel use case to the one we discussed. We look here of a case wherein there are multiple divisions within a single department. For instance, a state education department can have different scheme divisions responsible for, say, implementation of Samagra Shiksha scheme, the midday meal scheme, or even the scholarship schemes. Now, in such cases, monitoring of the sector-wide goals require coordination with multiple agencies or divisions. However, these divisions often have their own data systems which operate in silos with each other. They don't talk to each other. So, for example, the midday meal system is not yet integrated with the UDIs. Now, it may be quite helpful to actually estimate how the midday meal but with one variable available in one data set, which is the midday meal scheme data set, and the other one on the UDIs, with no common identifiers between the two data systems, it may not be possible or very tough to use administrative data to carry out such analysis. In addition, at times, we also find that data which is reported by divisions is not available at the right granularity adherence to standard metadata standards. Now, to resolve such challenges and ensure that all MIS systems within the departments or within the divisions in a particular department at the state level communicate with each other by following similar standards, the state governments can use Dgqi to create better MIS right at the design stage and provide for easier one-stop access to all sector-related interventions in the Dgqi questionnaire, and to this effect, the Dgqi questionnaire can be customized. Also, we find that usually the state departments are in charge of release of project funds. In the standard Dgqi questionnaire, currently we track data used, but for example, we do not modify that particular question to include something like fund release or project processes in that particular for particular question. Further, data strategy and outcomes assessment should happen only once, since the strategy is formed at the department level in the initial part of the exercise. The Dgqi questionnaire can be customized. Next slide, please. Now we look at how the Dgqi questionnaire can be helpful to the finance departments in the states and the UTs. We noticed that the finance departments are now rapidly moving towards performance-based budgeting, which leads to better accountability of state funds and expenditure. However, for this, the finance departments, they need reliable, good quality, timely data on performance of the programs they are running from several other departments. So, and such a monitoring framework, which is published as part of the union budget each year and is utilized also for periodic reviews at the highest levels within the government of India. But such performance data for budgeting is still a struggle at the state level. So to overcome this challenge, the finance departments can use Dgqi to conduct a comparative assessment of the processes governing data quality of a different data streams across departments to identify areas of improvement. This will improve the reliability of the administrative data which is coming to them on performance of the schemes, and also give government's data for budgeting decisions, and in the long run demonstrate accountability and greater transparency on part of the state governments in their budgeting and expenditure exercise. Now, how can this be done? So the finance departments can customize the Dgqi to add questions on the kind of indicators being tracked by the MIS systems and check or say fund allocation between the different districts and timely release of funds through the finance departments to different districts. The responses can then be sought online once the questionnaire after the quality systems, and in case there are fault lines, the reforms can be initiated. The final use case, next slide please. The final use case that we see today is for a specific state division which is implementing a particular scheme or an IT-based intervention. And such smaller even government divisions can make use of Dgqi framework. They usually need to oversee the program and also make mid-course corrections in the schemes they implement in case there are fault lines. However, what we see is that they often struggle with reliable data, which may be available to them at the right granularity and frequency. Can be helpful for such divisions to self-assess themselves on various parameters of data management. What this will do is this will help them identify areas of improvement, capacity gap, even digitize their own systems in a coherent manner that collects high quality data and aid day-to-day implementation of the process of the scheme or the program they are. Also use Dgqi as a way of it while optimizing their reporting burden. For example, in case of a division which is in charge of, say, a public service delivery portal, then they will have to customize the Dgqi questionnaire to cover the non-schematic interventions undertaken by the division, also customize to cover how this data can be used by the division for decision making, like for fund releases or process management, etc. And such an assessment by the state division can also include automation of the collection process at the ground level and also embed better. Next slide. Thank you. So here we broadly look at the steps for the states to fully contextualize a Dgqi questionnaire basis their characteristics and needs. The first step is to really understand and customize. Begin by understanding the overall objectives, the overall architecture, and the methodology of the Dgqi exercise that we discussed today in detail. The framework and the associated self-assessment questionnaire can then be customized to suit the needs of the organization. In the sense of department or the division of the state government which wants to use Dgqi. And this adoption can include modification of the questions, relevant to particular instances and situations. Similarly, methodology of this whole exercise can also be modified by the user agencies depending on their data requirements. So, for example, more weightage can be provided to the data driven out. And then the other parameters or the umbrella parameters of this exercise can be given a lower weightage. So both methodology and the Dgqi toolkit are available on the DMEO website under the monitoring tab. The next step, once we understand and customize the questionnaire, is to begin with self-assessment exercise with the participating agencies. The questionnaire can be canvassed on an online portal with the dedicated credentials. Would be primary, and it is equally crucial to ensure that the participating agencies are well versed, and for this we can have a lot of capacity building and training sessions organized, and all the training resources can be made in multilingual formats to encourage greater use. And the use of responses in the first round. So once this is done, we can have the responses coming in for the first round, and then these responses can be used as a baseline for the next round of the exercises. The third step is to identify and foster identify specific reform areas for each of the participating agencies. They must also develop a mechanism to regularly track the implementation of action plans made by the participating plans which have been prepared by the participating agencies. And for this, and even an independent third-party audit of the responses, an action plan can be done if required. As the final step, but a very important one, is to reward and upscale. Here, we need to really embed of the reform actions within the measurement and scoring processes in the next rounds of the exercise. So here we need to undertake these exhaustive measurements on a regular basis, and this way also institutionalize the thrust towards the exercise with regular periodic reviews and in the next slide, we look at the more operational aspects of using DGQI at the state level. And there are some do's and don'ts listed here while the states adopt the DGQI framework. Essentially, there are three core do's we would like to focus on. Rules related to this need to be born or need to be a result of the consultations with various participating departments or divisions at the state level, as the case may be. Second, it is very important that this exercise is driven through self-assessment of data preparedness of the various departments and the divisions of the state. Exercise remains action oriented in the sense that there's a particular action plan which is drawn at the department level and is monitored through periodic reviews, and also monitored through a particular deadline to drive reforms in the greater data ecosystem. Our state colleagues to use DGQI and drive reforms for better governance in the long term. We have uploaded a toolkit on the DMEO website, wherein guidance on methodology, the whole DGQI exercise, along with the use cases we just discussed, is uploaded, and you can find it under the monitoring tab. Use and reference. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the informative presentation. We have some questions from the audience. First question is, can DGQI be used by district administration and how? I would request Anand to please answer this question.
Sure. DGQI methodology, as we have been mentioning throughout the presentation, can be used across all the three tiers of the government, be it the central government, certain required customizations based on the use case, which is what we have been trying to talk about. So Vinu mentioned in the use case. So for example, if you for them, it would be important to understand that they have a role. So district governments have twin roles. One of the key roles when it concerns to data is collecting data to meet the needs of decentralized decision making. So district governments are primarily driven to implement the programs and course correct while implementing at the unit level to identify the gaps and push for implementation. So that is the decentralized data use. The second is they have to collect a lot of data and report it so that the state or the central government MIS systems reflect that data in the aggregate form for further analysis at the policy making level. So for these two twin purposes, Dgqi can be used in both the senses. Drive better decision making. Yes, Dgqi can help because it guides the thinking of implementers by telling them which particular program can be made more granular, more frequent if self-administered for all their individual implementing programs, and also how it can be made more granular by using geotagging, mobile apps wherever possible. And that is the first. If district administrations have to, let's say, talk about the reporting requirements, so they collect a lot of data to report to the higher authorities. In such case, Dgqi can help ease the process of data collection and reporting with the use of technology and suggest or maybe even about how that can be done. So that's how I feel. That's how Dgqi is essentially very critical.
Thanks, Anand. The next question is from Subarna. Do we quality check the customized Dgqi questionnaire to ensure that assessments are comparable to other versions of the questionnaire?
So for a particular, so when we have to go through a stage of piloting, and that is when the questionnaires and the required customizations and their relevance can be validated. Now, once those piloting has been done, typically you would go about canvassing the entire state government and canvasses the questionnaire after due customizations for all departments. Now, in such cases, the questionnaire, once piloted and validated, need not subsequently, as you go ahead with the implementation, some questions may change because certain responses to certain questions may get saturated, because let's say all departments achieve highest granularity levels, a theoretical point. Temporal variations. So, but in our understanding, as far as variation between different units is concerned, it may not be required because it is preferred that once a questionnaire is designed, it is sufficiently generic yet comprehensive for it to be applicable to different departments or different units.
Would it be the data we usually collect, or for Dgqi some special data is to be collected? I would request Gunjan to respond.
For when we usually collect data for any, first of all, the answer would be no. There is separate data that is collected I'll try to explain why. So essentially, DGQI is not about scheme performance. So therefore, to take an example, for example, if there is education department usually collects data on how its schemes are performing or how the sector is performing. So therefore, you would collect data maybe the number of schools which have the necessary infrastructure, the school enrollment rates, net enrollment rates, to measure the performance of the schemes or to monitor the input. So you may collect some data on what were the kind of funds that were allocated to the scheme, what has been the disbursal rate, so on and so forth. But for DGQI, we are not asking for data on any of these parameters. What DGQI does is, DGQI is asking for data on the data quality that underlies beneath these indicators. So essentially, schools have infrastructure, DGQI will ask questions on how is this data being collected, at what granularity is this data collected. Is it collected at the school level or at the district level or at the state level? Then it's asking how frequent is this data. Is it being collected annually or monthly? Then we are asking questions on how confident are we about the data we are reporting. So it will have questions of cleaning the data and checking if this data is making sense or not. So, and then eventually, once this data has been reported on the MIS, it will then ask how is this data being used by the department. So is this education department then making use of this data to decide fund releases to schools? Is the department using data to make mid-course corrections certain period of time, even though all the funds have been disbursed to them? Then identifying those pockets of schools using the data that has been reported on the MIS. So essentially, therefore, DGQI is an enabler that is asking questions on basic how therefore this data is not usually available public domain, and therefore it has been administered in self-assessment mode, and departments need to answer this question for themselves. And then eventually, once all this is done, it will create better data quality in the reported indicators, and hence overall later on it will result in the improvement of the data that is reported on these MIS and dashboards.
And just one addition there would be that the theme that technology throughout the entire process, because for example, Gunjan mentioned about the process of looking at the school infrastructure. Let's say now, is there, for example, satellite imagery which is being used to validate the data which is being collected? So we are talking of how the entire process is being managed and not what data is being collected. We are saying, good, you have an MIS system, but what is these MIS systems? Be it data collection, be it data quality control, we are asking questions about the processes of data collection and use. That is what the focus is, because that is what we want to improve.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks, Gunjan. Questions should get more weightage than the rest. Anand, would like to respond.
So if you look at the weightages that we mentioned, our data governance quality index, as we implemented it here in case of the central government, is that we have 3 pillars. The first pillar is that all the departments, the ministries and the departments need to have a institutional structure in form of DSU and an action plan in place. The second pillar asks questions about their individual MIS this data which is in the individual systems for department level policy making, for synergistic data use. So when we did this entire exercise at DMEO, and when we were thinking about the weightages, we said what is the most important thing that we want to do first. the most important thing that we thought is critical, given that all the different divisions, all the different ministries in the government and their scheme divisions are at different stages, is that we need to first ensure that each and every scheme siloed, but individually it has to be very good system. It has to be designed and implemented in a way that it can exchange data later on, but let that individual system be good first, then we will talk about the exchange, which is why your second pillar on data systems has the maximum weightage of 60%, and then the rest of the two pillars, which is whether or not you have an institutional structure, whether or not you have the outcomes, has 20% weightages each. Now, in case if there is a state which has very good data systems, then they would rather want to make sure that they focus on data integration and exchange more, which is why the focus on the third pillar will increase. So the weightages for them will increase. So the short answer is that depending on the stage of evolution that any particular entity is and the use case, the weightages have to be decided. And as far as weightages of individual themes are concerned, again, it depends on weightage can be improved. So it is up to the agency to implement it. However, we would suggest, based on our experience of the last 2 years, that the weightage of data systems pillar be kept at the maximum, because that drives a lot of implementation changes on the ground, because every division gets activated and wants having dynamic weightages. The weightages in first year may be different from the weightages in the second and the third year. I know that would reduce comparability in temporal comparability, but the idea of this index is much less to ensure temporal comparability, but to drive action, and that is where this will be useful. And in terms of questions, we have already discussed them in detail in the use cases presentation. Our tool specific cases as well.
Thanks, Anand. There's another question related to the questionnaire. There might be many questions or themes that might not be applicable to all state departments or schemes. How do we account for non-applicability of the same? I would request Gunjan to respond.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we definitely agree that this often happens, that different departments and different schemes will have they undertake different type of interventions, and therefore certain you'd feel that certain questions may not be applicable, or certain or an intervention or a ministry of a certain type. So we encountered the same, I would say, concern during from the ministries departments when we were undertaking this exercise with the central ministries departments. But we have taken care of it in our questionnaire. We need to ensure that for each question we are having options that are quite exhaustive in nature. That's why initially when we said that we designed our framework, we tried to keep it as exhaustive as possible, so that it is covering different types of ministries and their different type of intervention. To give an example, for example, if we consider the question on what granularity is the data the public distribution system, the last granularity at which data should be collected should be beneficiary based. But if we look at an infrastructure oriented scheme which is developing general public infrastructure, let's say a road that is being developed by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, then in that case the last unit of data that needs to be collected will be project level data. So therefore in the questionnaire, when we asked this question, what is the granularity at which you are collecting data, we had several options ranging from national, state, district, village to project level to beneficiary level. And then during our scoring, we made sure that and against all these options, we also had sub options, whether yes, no, or not applicable. So therefore, if for an infrastructure scheme, a beneficiary level granularity is not applicable, they can mark not applicable in beneficiary level, and they can mark whether they're doing project level data collection as yes or no. And accordingly, then they are being scored or graded on the basis of whether out of the applicable options at which granularity they are collecting data. So therefore, first of all, you need to make sure that the options in the questions are as exhaustive as possible, so that you can take care of different use cases. Then second, like I mentioned, within these questions, we had not applicable option for the ministries or departments to fill up. So for example, when we asked questions on data quality, the kind of back check mechanisms that they are using, we had different options, whether they're conducting social audits, etc. And if it is not a beneficiary oriented scheme, let's say, therefore it may not be applicable, we had a not applicable options right there for the ministries to select. So second is having the not applicable option for the ministries to select for the questions wherever applicable. And then third, finally, using this not applicable option during the scoring process very conservatively. So when a ministry selects not applicable option for a particular questionnaire, we redistributed the weight of that question to other questions in that theme. So therefore, what happened was that question was not included in the scoring itself. Therefore, we were not unnecessarily penalizing the ministry for not undertaking something that was not applicable or not relevant for them. So you need to make sure that we have those kind of nuances in the questions. Then similarly, we also deployed range-based scoring at certain questions where if they are undertaking, let's say, 4 out of 10 types of data visualization, they still get a score as high as undertaking 9 out of 10 data visualizations, because some of the visualizations may not be applicable for that ministry or scheme. So these are the 3 steps that you can take care of to design while designing the questionnaire, to make sure that it is exhaustive and it is flexible enough to be able to assess different type of interventions and different types of schemes. To answer the questions on non-applicability of themes, the theme as such, the 12 themes that have been defined, more or less all the themes will be applicable to all the schemes, because it is talking about the general life cycle of data and the data processes that need to be undertaken for every data or MIS system that is being set up. So therefore, the question of non-applicability of theme does not arise much in the present framework in our experience till now.
I'll respond to the so we have a comment in the Q&A window. So I'll just respond to some of the points, and I think they're quite relevant. So while some of the comments that have been concerns that have been raised are absolutely right, I mean, which is why Dgqi holds so much value as an exercise, especially for state governments. And in that context, we also completely agree that for such an exercise to be implemented, let's say across the entire state, a mandate has to be driven. In case of central government, we had the Prime Minister's office. A similar office at the state level should be driving the exercise to ensure that it really takes a time-bound and an accelerated pathway. And secondly, there are a few questions that are asked. So as far as this exercise is concerned on Dgqi, the webinar is just a start, as we have already mentioned. We would be happy to collaborate with any state government, any planning department, or any other entity who is willing to undertake this exercise. And that collaboration can range across the board. It can start from building and conceptualizing the entire exercise for a entire state context, or in case if any particular department wants to do Dgqi assessment on their own and build their own independent action plans, or it can be for any government, let's say a department which is in charge of the local governments, in case, for example, rural development or panchayati raj equivalents, and who want to implement the exercise at the 3rd tier of the governance. So we would be happy to collaborate. our collaboration, we would be happy to extend any form of implementation hand-holding as well. So please reach out to us. We have mentioned those the email ID at the end of the presentation, and we would be happy to help wherever possible.
These were the only questions that we received in our Q&A box. We thank everyone for posting these interesting questions. Before I hand it over to Shailendra sir for closing remarks, I would request all the participants to please fill up the feedback form. We have dropped the link in the chat box and in the Q&A window. We request you to please fill up the feedback form before logging out from the webinar. It will be helpful for us in planning future webinars. Thank you. Shailendra sir.
So I'll give the vote of thanks. In fact, if sir gives the closing remarks. So it's more of vote of thanks in that case, and also because it is time almost. I really want to just thank everybody who participated in today's webinar. We were very eager to bring our Dgqi experience to all of you because we have seen how much of a transformation in awareness this exercise has brought at the central ministry department level. And it is something that has taken its own time, but we are very happy with the kind of conversations that are now happening among us because of this exercise around some questions which perhaps unless we had it in a systematic way, we would not ask ourselves. We have had as a country a digital India experiment going on, a countrywide project going on for quite some time. We have a digital footprint, but what do we do with all of that? So we are actually now entering a post-digital phase. And in this post-digital phase, it is very important to see how we are using our strengths of the digital footprint that we have already. So in that process, this exercise is very much a logical step to understand where we are today, where we want to go, how we will get there. All of those simple questions which are very important for us in a strategic way to ask as a country. And because it cannot just happen if it happens at the central ministry department level, the team has brought out to you some contextualized use cases around which you can think of real use cases at the block, village, panchayat level, district level, also of course the state level. We got to bring it around to that, and we will be able to definitely do something if we follow up with today's initial engagement. We can have some deep state-wise engagement. We can once again thank you all for participating. Thank you DG sir for chairing and for guiding us for this webinar today. Thank you Samrendra for being the anchor for all our state engagements. Thank you Anand, thank you Gunjan, Vinu, Ashwarya, and Bishunji and Anmol. Special thanks to Deepak and for our NIC support here today. And we topic and another topic, and we look forward to your feedback. Please keep in touch with us. Thank you so much.